In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where stars burned like ancient candles and planets drifted in silent orbits, there existed a world unlike any other. A world cloaked in perpetual twilight, its skies painted with swirling hues of violet and gold, pierced by twin suns that never quite set but lingered on the horizon as if reluctant to leave. This was Itherian, home to an alien race known as the Varathi, a civilization older than most galaxies, their history etched into crystalline spires that rose from the planet's surface like jagged teeth. The Varathi were not merely advanced. They were ethereal beings whose very existence seemed woven from the fabric of dreams. Their bodies shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with emotion, each pulse of light conveying thoughts too complex for words alone. They communicated through resonant harmonics, a language so intricate it defied translation by even the most sophisticated machines humanity had devised. To speak their tongue required more than vocal cords. It demanded understanding, empathy, and perhaps something deeper still, connection. For centuries, Earth's explorers had ventured into space, driven by curiosity and ambition, seeking new worlds and allies among the stars. But encounters with the Varathi remained elusive. The few attempts at contact ended in failure, leaving behind only cryptic recordings of haunting melodies and incomprehensible gestures. Humanity's scientists called them the unapproachable, their culture impenetrable, their motives inscrutable. Yet whispers persisted, tales of those who claimed to have glimpsed the heart of Varathi society, stories of awe-inspiring beauty and profound terror intertwined. At the center of this enigmatic civilization stood the alien queen, a figure shrouded in myth and reverence. She was no mere ruler but a living embodiment of her people's collective consciousness, her presence commanding both fear and devotion. Her voice, when she chose to use it, could silence entire fleets or stir armies to march across star systems. And yet, despite her power, she rarely interacted with outsiders. Some said she viewed humans as little more than insects, fleeting sparks in the grand tapestry of existence. Others believed she simply saw no reason to engage with creatures incapable of comprehending her kind. It was against this backdrop of wonder and mystery that Marcus Hale found himself hurtling through the void aboard the Eos, a sleek vessel designed for deep space exploration. Marcus wasn't a soldier or a diplomat. He was a linguist, one of the best Earth had ever produced. His obsession with languages began in childhood, poring over dusty manuscripts and listening to recordings of endangered dialects until he could mimic every inflection perfectly. By adulthood, he spoke dozens of tongues fluently, his mind a labyrinth of syntax and semantics. When the United Earth Coalition announced plans to make another attempt at contacting the Varathi, Marcus volunteered without hesitation. He knew the odds were slim. No human had ever successfully communicated with the Varathi, let alone earned their trust. But Marcus carried within him a quiet determination, a belief that somewhere beneath the layers of misunderstanding lay a bridge waiting to be crossed. Armed with cutting-edge technology and years of research, he embarked on what many considered a fool's errand. Still, as the Eos approached Zytherian, its hull glowing faintly under the twin suns' light, Marcus felt a thrill of anticipation mingled with dread. He was about to step into the unknown, face to face with beings who might dismiss him as unworthy, or worse, ignore him entirely. As the Eos descended towards Zytherian's surface, Marcus peered out the viewport, his breath catching at the sight below. The landscape stretched endlessly, a surreal mosaic of crystalline structures that refracted light into dazzling rainbows. Towering spires jutted skyward, their surfaces pulsating with soft luminescence, while rivers of liquid silver wound through valleys dotted with clusters of smaller formations. It was a world alive with energy, humming faintly with vibrations that resonated in his chest like the opening notes of a symphony. The landing site had been prearranged through automated signals sent months earlier, though whether the Varathi acknowledged them remained uncertain. As the ship touched down on a flat expanse near one of the larger spires, Marcus donned his environmental suit, ensuring every seal was secure. The air outside was breathable, but the temperature fluctuated wildly, and the atmosphere carried traces of elements unfamiliar to human biology. He stepped onto the alien soil, boots crunching against a fine layer of iridescent dust that sparkled like crushed gemstones. Above him, the twin suns cast elongated shadows that danced across the ground, shifting unpredictably as clouds of luminous particles drifted overhead. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and strangeness of it all. Then, movement caught his eye. From the base of the nearest spire emerged figures. Varathi, their forms fluid and graceful, gliding forward with an elegance that seemed almost supernatural. Their translucent skin shimmered with cascading colors, shifting hues that hinted at emotions Marcus couldn't fully grasp. Each step they took left faint trails of light in their wake, as though they were painting the air itself. Marcus swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. This was it, the moment he had prepared for his entire life. Raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm, he activated the translator device strapped to his wrist. It hummed softly, projecting a holographic interface that displayed phonetic approximations of Varothi speech patterns. He had spent countless hours practicing these sounds, memorizing their rhythms and cadences until they became second nature. Now, as the aliens drew closer, he summoned every ounce of courage and began to speak. His first attempt was hesitant, the syllables awkward and stilted. The Varothi paused, tilting their heads in unison, their glowing patterns flickering with curiosity, or perhaps amusement. Encouraged, Marcus tried again, this time with greater confidence. The words flowed more smoothly now, his voice rising and falling in imitation of the melodic tones he had studied so meticulously. He introduced himself, explaining his purpose in simple terms: peace, understanding, connection. At first, there was no response. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the distant hum of the environment. Then, one of the Varothi stepped forward, its form radiating a warm amber glow. It extended a delicate limb, its fingers tapering into points that shimmered like starlight. Marcus froze, unsure if this was a gesture of acceptance or warning. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out, his gloved hand trembling as it met the alien's touch. For a brief instant, warmth surged through him, accompanied by a flood of sensations, images, emotions, fragments of thought that overwhelmed his senses. When the contact broke, Marcus staggered back, gasping for air. The Varothi regarded him with what he interpreted as approval, their lights pulsing in slow, rhythmic waves. One by one, the others followed suit, surrounding him in a loose circle. They began to emit low, harmonic tones, their voices blending seamlessly into a chorus that resonated deep within his bones. It was beautiful, haunting, and utterly alien. Summoning his resolve, Marcus responded in kind, his voice joining theirs in an imperfect but earnest attempt to harmonize. The effort left him breathless, sweat trickling down his temples beneath the confines of his helmet. But as the final note faded, something remarkable happened. The Varothi paused, their lights dimming momentarily before flaring brighter than before. A ripple passed through their ranks, and then, to Marcus's astonishment, laughter erupted, not harsh or mocking, but rich and melodic, filling the air with a sound that seemed to vibrate through his very soul. In that moment, Marcus realized he had done something extraordinary. He had spoken their language, not just mimicked its sounds, but tapped into its essence, bridging the chasm between species. And yet, as the laughter echoed around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The laughter of the Varothi rippled outward, carrying with it a weight that transcended mere amusement. It was layered, multifaceted, each note imbued with nuances Marcus could scarcely comprehend. At first, he felt a flush of pride, believing he had succeeded in breaking through their aloofness. But as the laughter continued, growing richer and more resonant, doubt crept in. Was this truly a sign of acceptance? Or was it something else entirely? Mockery disguised as camaraderie? One of the Varothi stepped forward, its form shimmering with a cascade of blues and greens that pulsed in sync with its laughter. Its movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, as if performing for an audience. Marcus watched intently, trying to decipher the meaning behind the display. The creature tilted its head, its luminous eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his stomach churn. Then, without warning, it raised a slender appendage and traced a series of symbols in the air. The gestures were fluid, elegant, and unmistakably communicative. The translator device on Marcus's wrist buzzed furiously, struggling to interpret the sequence. Fragments of text appeared on the holographic display, disjointed phrases that hinted at concepts far beyond his grasp: impossible, audacity, miracle. The device faltered, unable to reconcile the complexity of the message. Frustration bubbled up inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. If he was to understand, he would need to rely on more than technology. He would need to listen, truly listen, with every fiber of his being. The Varothi's laughter softened, transitioning into a series of harmonic tones that resonated in his chest like the thrumming of strings. Marcus closed his eyes, focusing on the vibrations, letting them wash over him. Slowly, painfully, he began to piece together fragments of meaning. Words formed in his mind, not as translations but as impressions. Feelings, images, flashes of insight. He understood, dimly, that the laughter was not directed at him personally but at the absurdity of his endeavor. To the Varathi, his attempt to master their language must have seemed laughably naive, akin to a child trying to grasp the intricacies of quantum physics. And yet, there was something more beneath the surface, a current of genuine curiosity. The Varathi were intrigued, perhaps even impressed, by his audacity. They had expected indifference or failure, yet here he stood, clumsy but determined, speaking their tongue with a sincerity that bordered on reverence. It was this paradox that sparked their mirth. The incongruity of a fragile, ephemeral being daring to reach for something so vast and ancient. Marcus opened his eyes, meeting the gaze of the Varathi who had initiated the exchange. Its colors had shifted again, now a deep indigo streaked with veins of silver. He recognized the pattern. It was one he had studied extensively, associated with contemplation and introspection. Taking a cautious step forward, he raised his hands once more, palms open in a gesture of supplication. "I may be small," he said haltingly, using the closest approximation of their language he could muster, "but I seek to understand, to connect." The Varathi tilted its head again, its expression unreadable. For a moment, the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with anticipation. Then, without warning, the creature emitted a single piercing note that reverberated through the clearing. The others fell silent, their lights dimming as they turned their attention toward their leader. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline, his heart pounding in his ears. Whatever was about to happen, he knew it would define the course of his mission, and perhaps his life. The leader extended its arm once more, this time pointing directly at Marcus. Its voice rose in a series of cascading harmonics, each tone layered with meaning that defied easy interpretation. The translator struggled valiantly, spitting out fragmented phrases: challenge, test, prove. Marcus clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had come prepared for skepticism, for resistance, but this felt different. This was a gauntlet thrown down, a demand for proof that he was worthy of their attention. Before he could respond, the Varathi leader gestured sharply, and the circle around him tightened. The others began to emit low, rhythmic pulses, their lights synchronizing into a hypnotic pattern. Marcus felt the vibrations seep into his bones, a steady thrum that seemed to resonate with his very heartbeat. Panic clawed at the edges of his mind, but he fought it back, reminding himself why he was here. Failure was not an option, not after everything he had sacrificed to get this far. Summoning every ounce of focus, Marcus began to sing. His voice wavered at first, raw and unpolished, but he poured every shred of emotion into the melody, letting the music carry his intent. He sang of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs, of their yearning to reach beyond themselves. He sang of hope, of connection, of the shared thread that bound all sentient beings together. The words came tumbling out in a torrent, some in Varathi, others in English, blending into a chaotic yet strangely coherent whole. As he sang, the Varathi reacted. Their lights flared brighter, their pulses quickening in response. One by one, they joined in, their voices weaving around his in a symphony of sound that filled the air with an otherworldly beauty. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, though he couldn't tell if they were from joy or exhaustion. The barrier between them was dissolving, replaced by something fragile and profound, a tentative bond forged in the crucible of mutual vulnerability. But just as the harmony reached its crescendo, the leader raised its hand, and the music ceased abruptly. Silence fell, thick and oppressive. The Varathi regarded him with an intensity that bordered on predatory, their lights flickering erratically. Marcus stood frozen, his chest heaving, unsure whether he had passed their test, or failed spectacularly. Then, the leader spoke again, its voice low and resonant. This time, the translator managed to capture a single chilling phrase: "You will see." With those words hanging in the air like a storm cloud, the Varathi turned as one and began to glide back toward the towering spire. Marcus hesitated, torn between relief and unease. What did they mean? Where were they taking him? And most importantly, what awaited him within the crystalline structure that loomed ahead, its surface shimmering with secrets older than time itself? Marcus followed the Varathi, his footsteps echoing faintly against the iridescent ground. The spire loomed larger with each step, its crystalline surface refracting light into prismatic bursts that danced across his visor. As he approached, the entrance revealed itself. Not a door, but an archway carved seamlessly into the structure, pulsing with a soft, inviting glow. The Varathi leader paused at the threshold, turning to regard him with an expression that Marcus couldn't decipher. Was it reassurance? Warning? Or simply indifference? There was no way to know. Steeling himself, Marcus crossed the threshold, the air inside the spire cool and tinged with a metallic tang. The interior was vast, cavernous, its walls lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe under the ambient light. Strange symbols glowed faintly, their meanings tantalizingly out of reach. The Varathi moved silently ahead, their forms casting long, distorted shadows that stretched unnaturally across the floor. Marcus trailed behind, his heart pounding as the enormity of his situation settled over him like a suffocating blanket. They led him deeper, descending along spiraling pathways that wound through the spire's core. The farther they went, the more the atmosphere changed. The air grew denser, heavy with an energy that prickled against his skin. Sounds began to emerge, low hums, distant echoes, and occasional bursts of harmonic tones that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It was as if the spire were alive, breathing, watching. Marcus felt small, insignificant, a speck of dust adrift in a sea of ancient knowledge. Finally, they arrived at a chamber unlike anything Marcus had seen before. The room was circular, its ceiling lost in shadow high above. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested an object that defied description. It shimmered with an inner light, its shape constantly shifting, as though it were undecided about its own form. Surrounding the pedestal were several Varathi, their bodies aglow with radiant hues that pulsed in unison. Marcus realized with a start that these were elders, their presence exuding an aura of wisdom and authority that made the others seem almost childlike in comparison. The leader gestured for Marcus to approach, its movements deliberate and unhurried. He obeyed, his legs trembling beneath him as he stepped closer to the pedestal. As he drew near, the object began to react, its light intensifying until it bathed the entire chamber in a warm, golden glow. The elders turned their gaze upon him, their eyes luminous and penetrating. Marcus felt exposed, as though every secret he had ever kept, every fear he had ever harbored, was laid bare before them. One of the elders extended a limb, touching the object lightly. Instantly, a wave of sensations flooded Marcus's mind. Visions of Zytherian's past, glimpses of its creation, its evolution, its triumphs and tragedies. He saw civilizations rise and fall, witnessed the birth of stars and the death of worlds. The sheer magnitude of it overwhelmed him, forcing him to his knees as tears streamed unchecked down his face. Through the torrent of images, one thing became clear. The Varathi were not merely inhabitants of this world, they were its custodians, guardians of a legacy that spanned eons. When the visions subsided, Marcus found himself gasping for air, his body racked with tremors. The elders regarded him impassively, their expressions unreadable. Then, the leader spoke again, its voice resonating with a gravity that silenced the chamber. The translator struggled to keep up, spitting out fragmented phrases, truth, responsibility, choice. Marcus clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. Whatever decision lay ahead, it would not be made lightly. The leader gestured once more, this time toward the object on the pedestal. Its light dimmed slightly, revealing intricate patterns etched into its surface. Marcus recognized them instantly. They were linguistic constructs, symbols that mirrored the structure of the Varathi language. But there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the object. A jolt of energy surged through him, sharp and electric, and suddenly he understood. The object was a key, a conduit for communication, a bridge between species. But it was also a test, a measure of worthiness. To wield it required not just knowledge, but empathy, humility, and an unshakable commitment to understanding. The Varathi were offering him a chance, but it came with a price. If he accepted, he would become a part of their story, bound to their fate in ways he could scarcely imagine. If he refused, he would be cast out, his journey ending here, his efforts rendered meaningless. Marcus stared at the object, his mind racing. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, threatening to crush him under its enormity. He thought of Earth, of the billions of lives depending on his success. He thought of the Varathi, their culture so rich, so complex, yet so alien. And he thought of himself, a man who had dedicated his life to bridging divides, to finding connections where none seemed possible. Could he do it? Could he bear the burden of what they were asking? Taking a deep breath, Marcus straightened, his resolve hardening. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. For better or worse, he had come too far to turn back now. As Marcus stood before the shimmering object, its light casting intricate patterns across the chamber, the Varathi elders watched him with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Their luminous forms pulsed in unison, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the spire itself. The leader stepped forward, its movements fluid and deliberate, and placed a delicate appendage on Marcus's shoulder. The touch sent a wave of warmth coursing through him, accompanied by a flood of emotions: pride, anticipation, and something deeper, more primal: trust. The translator device on Marcus's wrist buzzed urgently, struggling to process the torrent of information flowing from the elder's gesture. Words appeared on the holographic display, fragmented yet evocative: chosen, bridge, destiny. Marcus's breath hitched as realization dawned. This was no mere test. It was an initiation, a sacred rite that marked the beginning of a profound transformation. The Varathi were entrusting him with a responsibility far greater than he had anticipated, a role that transcended diplomacy or linguistic mastery. He was to become a conduit, a living link between two species separated by millennia of evolution and experience. The leader withdrew its hand, leaving Marcus awash in conflicting emotions. Pride swelled within him, tempered by an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. How could he, a mere human, possibly fulfill such a monumental task? Yet, as he gazed at the elders, their lights glowing with unwavering certainty, he felt a spark of determination ignite within him. They believed in him. Whether out of necessity or genuine faith, they saw potential in him that he had never dared to acknowledge in himself. Summoning his courage, Marcus reached out and grasped the object firmly. The moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of energy coursed through his body, electrifying every nerve. His vision blurred, and for an instant, he felt as though he were being pulled apart and reassembled at the molecular level. Images flashed before his eyes, countless faces, human and Varathi alike, their expressions ranging from hope to despair. Voices whispered in his mind, overlapping and discordant, each carrying fragments of stories untold. It was chaos, beautiful and terrifying, and Marcus clung to the object as if it were the only anchor in a storm-tossed sea. When the sensation subsided, Marcus found himself kneeling on the chamber floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The object in his hand had transformed, its shape stabilizing into a smooth, orb-like form that pulsed gently with a soft, golden light. The elders encircled him, their lights dimming to a serene glow. One by one, they extended their limbs, touching the orb lightly. With each contact, Marcus felt a new layer of understanding unfold within him. He grasped the nuances of Varathi culture, their values, their fears, their aspirations, in a way that transcended language. It was as though he had been granted access to their collective consciousness, a glimpse into the soul of their civilization. The leader spoke again, its voice resonating with a clarity that silenced the chamber. The translator struggled to capture the depth of its message, but Marcus no longer needed it. He understood instinctively, the meaning flowing into him like water into parched earth. The Varathi were not merely granting him permission to communicate, they were inviting him to share in their destiny. Through the orb, he would serve as a bridge, facilitating exchanges that went beyond words, exchanges of emotion, of memory, of spirit. It was a gift, but also a burden, one that would require every ounce of strength and resilience he possessed. Rising to his feet, Marcus held the orb aloft, its light casting intricate patterns across the chamber walls. The elders bowed their heads in unison, their lights flickering in acknowledgement. For the first time since his arrival on Zytherian, Marcus felt a sense of belonging, however fleeting. He was no longer an outsider looking in. He was part of something vast and ancient, a thread woven into the tapestry of a civilization that spanned the stars. Yet, even as pride and purpose surged within him, a shadow of doubt lingered. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Varathi had entrusted him with a sacred duty, but what if he failed? What if the fragile connection he had forged crumbled under the weight of misunderstanding or mistrust? These questions gnawed at the edges of his mind, threatening to undermine the fragile equilibrium he had achieved. Taking a deep breath, Marcus steadied himself. He could not afford to dwell on doubts or fears. The Varathi had chosen him, and he would honor their trust. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same determination that had brought him this far. Lowering the orb, he turned to the leader, meeting its luminous gaze with unwavering resolve. "I am ready," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a promise, a vow to uphold the fragile bond he had forged and to navigate the complexities of a relationship that transcended species and time. The leader inclined its head, its colors shifting to a deep, reassuring blue. Then, with a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial, it led Marcus back toward the entrance of the spire. The elders followed, their lights dimming as they receded into the shadows. As they emerged into the twilight of Zytherian's surface, Marcus felt the cool breeze against his skin, grounding him in the present. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt equipped to face whatever lay ahead. As Marcus stepped out of the spire, the alien landscape stretched before him, bathed in the dim glow of the twin suns. The crystalline spires shimmered faintly, their surfaces alive with shifting hues that mirrored the emotions of the Varathi accompanying him. For a moment, he paused, letting the enormity of what had just transpired sink in. He held the orb tightly in his hand, its steady pulse a reminder of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that seemed to hum in harmony with his own heartbeat. The leader gestured toward the horizon, where a procession of Varathi awaited, their forms glowing softly against the twilight. They stood in silence, their lights flickering in rhythmic patterns that Marcus recognized as a form of collective communication. It was as though they were preparing for something, a ceremony, perhaps, or an event of great significance. Whatever it was, Marcus knew instinctively that it involved him. His role as the bridge between species was about to be tested in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The leader moved forward, and Marcus followed, his boots crunching softly against the iridescent dust. As they approached the gathered Varathi, the crowd parted, creating a path that led to a circular platform at the center of the clearing. The platform was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. Its surface appeared to be made of liquid light, rippling gently as though alive. At its edges, intricate carvings pulsed with faint luminescence, their designs reminiscent of the symbols etched into the orb he carried. The leader ascended the platform first, turning to face Marcus with an expression that conveyed both authority and encouragement. Marcus hesitated only briefly before stepping onto the platform himself. The moment his foot touched its surface, a surge of energy coursed through him, more intense than anything he had experienced inside the spire. The orb in his hand flared brightly, its light merging with the platform's glow until the two became indistinguishable. Marcus felt as though he were standing at the nexus of two worlds, suspended between humanity and the Varathi, connected yet divided. The gathered Varathi began to emit low, harmonic tones, their voices weaving together into a symphony that resonated deep within Marcus's chest. He closed his eyes, allowing the music to wash over him, each note carrying fragments of emotion and memory. Through the orb, he sensed their collective thoughts, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. He realized then that this was not merely a ritual. It was a communion, a shared experience meant to solidify the bond between him and the Varathi. Summoning every ounce of focus, Marcus raised the orb above his head, letting its light illuminate the clearing. The Varathi responded immediately, their colors shifting in unison to match the orb's glow. A wave of understanding passed between them, transcending language and logic. Marcus felt a profound sense of unity, as though he were no longer an individual but part of a greater whole. Yet, even as the connection deepened, he remained acutely aware of the differences that separated them. The Varathi saw the universe through lenses shaped by millennia of evolution. Their perspectives were vast and alien, rooted in experiences far beyond human comprehension. When the symphony reached its crescendo, The leader stepped forward once more, its voice cutting through the music with a clarity that silenced the crowd. This time, the translator device managed to capture a coherent phrase, "Speak your truth." Marcus froze, the weight of the command pressing down on him. Speak his truth? What did that mean? Was he to recount his journey here, his struggles and triumphs? Or was he expected to articulate something deeper, something universal? The orb pulsed in his hand, urging him forward, its light growing brighter with each passing second. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and began to speak, not in words, but in feelings, memories, and images. He thought of Earth, of its sprawling cities and endless oceans, of its people striving and failing and trying again. He thought of the countless languages he had studied, each one a window into a unique way of seeing the world. He thought of his own life, the sacrifices he had made, the loneliness he had endured, the moments of doubt that had nearly broken him. And finally, he thought of why he had come here, to this distant planet, to these enigmatic beings. The desire to connect, to understand, to prove that despite their differences, humans and Varathi shared a common thread. The orb amplified his thoughts, projecting them outward in waves of light and sound. The Varathi reacted visibly, their forms shimmering with intensity as they absorbed his message. Some emitted soft, melodic tones that seemed almost like sighs of recognition, while others shifted their colors rapidly, as if processing complex emotions. Marcus felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely liberated. For the first time, he wasn't just speaking to be understood, he was being truly heard. When the final wave of light faded, silence fell over the clearing. The Varathi regarded him with expressions that ranged from awe to contemplation. The leader extended a limb, touching the orb lightly. Instantly, a new vision flooded Marcus's mind, a glimpse of Zytherian's future, intertwined with Earth's. He saw humans and Varathi working side by side, sharing knowledge and resources, building bridges across the stars. But he also saw challenges, misunderstandings, conflicts, moments of doubt and fear. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was possible. That much was clear. The leader withdrew its hand, breaking the connection. Its color shifted to a deep, calming green, and it spoke again, its voice resonating with quiet authority. The translator struggled to interpret, but Marcus didn't need it. He understood without words. The journey was just beginning. The bond they had forged was fragile, requiring constant care and effort to maintain. But it was real, and it was worth fighting for. As the gathering dispersed, the Varathi returning to their spires and routines, Marcus remained on the platform, the orb still glowing softly in his hand. He looked out over the alien landscape, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and trepidation. He had been given a gift, but also a burden, a responsibility to carry the hopes of two species on his shoulders. The road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but he was ready. Whatever lay in store, he would face it with courage and resolve. And so, as the twin suns dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the crystalline spires, Marcus took his first steps toward an unknown future. The orb pulsed gently in his hand, a beacon of hope and possibility. The Varathi watched him from afar, their lights flickering in silent acknowledgement. Together, they had taken the first step toward a new chapter in the story of the cosmos, a chapter written not in isolation, but in collaboration. As Marcus walked away from the platform, the orb's glow dimmed but never faded, a constant reminder of the bond he now carried. The Varathi's lights shimmered softly in the distance, their presence both comforting and daunting. He knew the challenges ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but he also felt a quiet strength growing within him. The alien queen's laughter echoed faintly in his mind, not mockery, but a call to rise above his limits. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be a bridge between worlds. The stars above seemed closer now, their light guiding him forward. Each step he took felt heavier, yet more purposeful, as if the weight of two species rested on his shoulders. The orb pulsed once more, as if affirming his resolve. And though the path ahead was uncertain, Marcus smiled, a small, determined smile. He was ready.